Hey guys, I'm Morgan and I've been working at Topstitch for about a year and a half. Today I'm going to show you how to do gathers. Gathers are a great skill for beginners to learn to make any garment or anything they're working on be a little bit more jazzy. You can see on the essential shirt I'm wearing right now, I've added a row of gathered peplums that I think are really nice and make the shirt look a lot more fancy. So today we're just going to be going over the basics of how to gather. So to start with our gathers, we first need to look at our fabric. So you can see right here, I have a pretty wide strip of fabric that we're working with, but we want to make it cinched. Basically, the idea of gathering is to take something that's long and flat and make it kind of textured and cinched up. So the first thing you need to do when you start to gather is go over to your machine and you are going to bump that stitch length up. Most people, when they turn their machine on, the stitch length is going to be around 2.4 to 2.6 if you have a computerized machine. Otherwise, if you have a mechanical machine, it might be wherever you last set it at. We're just gonna bump that stitch length up to about 3.5. If it's too short, then we're not gonna get the gathers we want. And if it's too long, then it's just a mess. So after we lengthen our stitch length, we are just gonna make sure that we pull our end threads out. So the reason why you do that is because when you gather, you wanna have some threads to grab onto. And it'll all make sense in a second. So we are just gonna start by lining up the edge of our fabric right with the 1/4 inch mark. If you've seen some videos before, you'll know that the 1/4 inch is about the edge of our foot. Now that we've made sure that we've lengthened our stitch length, we've pulled out these threads, we've lined it up with the edge of our foot down as always, we are just gonna go ahead and start stitching. You want to make sure your stitches are nice and even and it's not wiggling all over the place. Now you'll notice I'm not pulling the fabric through the machine at all. I'm just kind of like letting it do its thing. If you try to pull it through, that kind of might mess with the stitch length, especially since we're working with a longer stitch length. So we're just kind of going to let it glide through. Okay, now once we get to the end, this is an important part. I like to lift my foot up, I lift my needle up, I pull my threads out, but I'm making sure to leave a long enough length of threads at the ends, like that. So after we do that, we are just gonna do a second line of gathers. So you can do one line of gathers and that's totally fine, but if you wanna have a really neat and steady looking gather, I recommend doing 2 lines. So whenever you're ready to do your second line, you are just going to line up that first line up with the edge of your presser foot. Now, a little troubleshooting thing that I think makes a world of difference is making sure that these threads from your first line are all tangled up where your other threads are. On some machines, they might occasionally get sucked down into where our bobbin is, and it might cause some knots, some trouble with your machine. So to make sure that that doesn't happen, just pull those out to the side. Make sure these on our machine are pulled out to the side. Go ahead and line up that first stitch line with the edge of your foot, and you'll notice the edge of our fabric is right there on the 1/2 inch line. Most of the time, if you're working with modern day garment sewing patterns, they're gonna have your seam allowance at 5/8 inch, so you're still gonna have some wiggle room in there. Okay, now that all of our threads are nice and neat and pulled to the side, we are just gonna do another line of long stitches. Notice how I'm really trying to keep them even and a good even width apart. Sometimes if you're in a hurry, they might get a little squished in on each other, and that's okay. It's not gonna make your final product a mess or anything like that, but it's always nice to be neat because then I think it's a little easier to work with. Till we get to the very end, I raise my foot, raise my needle, I pull it out, making sure to have a long length on this one too. And now we have 2 even stitches of gathers. To start our gathers, I'm just gonna grab the 2 top threads from one side, leaving the 2 bottom threads just hanging out back there. And I am just gonna slowly cinch in. I like to kind of take a little bit and then smooth it out through the rest of the fabric. And just take it slow, no need to rush. Sewing should be calming, so this part should be calming too. So as I take it through this side, I don't want to neglect this side, because if you try to gather all from one side, you may find that your little pleats are uneven. So what I'll do is I will just grab the 2 top threads from this side. I'm going to pull them in my hand and let these 2 guys hang out. And then I'm just going to slowly start gathering from this corner. And I let them pull through. Okay, so I'm just going to keep on evenly distributing these gathers throughout the entire project until I get the length that I want. So depending on what you're working on, you may want it to be more or less gathered. For something that I'm wearing, I didn't want it to be super gathered, so you'll notice that the pleats or the gathers in this shirt aren't super intense. That means that on here, I just kind of took it to about here and I left it. I'm going to be showing you how to do a super gathered piece of fabric just to show you what it looks like, but depending on what you're working with and the length of fabric that you're trying to attach it to, it may be more or less gathered. We are just going to keep on evenly distributing these gathers throughout the entire thing until it looks about even. Some things you can do when you're working with another piece of fabric, like let's say I'm attaching this skirt, let's say this is the bottom of our skirt and I'm attaching it to our waistband, and we can say that our waistband is yay wide. We want to gather it till it's yay wide. So I will just keep on gathering until I get it to be the length that I want it to be. Okay, once I kind of pull it, I sometimes have it where there's a lot of gathers in the center. And then what I do is after I kind of get it all cinched up to the width that I want it to be, then you can see it still looks kind of uneven, but it's nice and cinched in. Then what I'll do is I will just patiently take these gathers and even them out, because you want each area to kind of look synonymous with the gathers around it. You don't want to have one section that's super cinched in and then one section that's flat, because then your gathers are going to look inconsistent. So instead you want to aim for just a really consistent amount of volume. Okay, so the final step to gathering is just going to make sure that everything is even. So if you look at this, you can kind of see that each gather kind of looks similar to the area around it. There's no areas that are super poofy and no areas that are super flat. So I could honestly nitpick this to death and endlessly try to make it perfect. But when you're attaching it to your waistband, there's a couple things you can do to make it a little bit easier. You can mark where your center is of your gathered section and mark where your center is of the waistband, match those up, and then just gather each half. That makes it a little bit easier. But either way, at the end, you will see that from our flat piece of fabric that we started with, we now have a beautiful, fun looking cinched thing. And doesn't that already kind of look like the top of a skirt? It's fun. Okay guys, that is how you do a gather. They are a great way to add flair to any garment, and they're awesome for making the Topstitch essential skirt. If you're interested in more sewing related content or tutorials, feel free to visit our YouTube channel and subscribe down below. Give us a like, tell us what you think. If you have any more questions, feel free to comment, and we are so happy to teach you how to sew. Happy sewing!